Well, I know you've all been waiting for it, but it's finally here. We're beginning it this week.
This week is Questions Week. All week, we're going to answer your questions. And you know what? We're not going to do anything else but answer your questions because there's so goddamn many of them.
And that's even after the culling of the herd, if you will.
Yep. Now, some other notes. Since there's no news or things of the day this week, I know there's big news and big things of the day going on.
We're well aware there's some video games that may need to be talked about.
Yeah. But all that is going to get pushed back because you know what? We're not a source of news. We're a source of news commentary. So if you don't know what the news is, maybe you should read some websites because that's where we get the news from. It's not like we're reporters or anything. And secondly, when we answer these questions, first of all, there's so many questions, we might actually make like 2 episodes worth of question answerings. So if that happens, we're just going to answer all of them, and maybe another episode in a coming week will be generated today, and then we'll be ahead a week, and it'll be pretty awesome.
Yeah, we'll see. We really don't know how long this would take. We just kind of went through the questions shoddily and quickly.
Yep. Also, we're not giving anyone credit for the questions they asked during the episode. You know who you are if we ask your question, so you'll still feel good when we ask it, unless we make fun of you. And if you don't know who asked the question, do you really care? And you can find out on the forum for most of them, and there are only a few email questions, so whatever. And it takes up too much time. So if we plus, we don't want to avoid the psychology of us. If we see that, 3 questions were all asked by the same person, it'll take time to make fun of them. And we don't want to wait. We don't want to waste time on stuff like that or introduce extra psychology into our answers.
And also, we cut out a lot of the questions that people asked. We're not going to bother with them. Now, don't feel bad because on one hand, a lot of the questions we cut because they were too good, and we're going to turn them into entire shows that are going to come up in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I never would have thought. It seems so weird that we keep asking for episode ideas. No one can give them. We ask for questions. We get more episode ideas than when we ask for episode ideas.
And also, some of you tried to be cute and clever, and nah, we're going to have none of that.
Nope. So you want to just get on with this? Let's move.
Yeah, I'll start with the first one because it's one that really only I can answer.
Let's just do them in order.
All right. Could you provide a detailed description of your amazing, quote, make Rim and Scott sound cleverer filter, unquote, or how to achieve such an effect?
Be cleverer.
Well, I'm not going to get into like how we do the show or the fact that we really don't edit at all anymore, but this magic filter that I didn't actually name it that. I think it was Jeff Tatarek who I said something about it, and he said, wow, it made me sound a lot cleverer than I really am. But all it does, real simply, is it goes through our audio, and I set up a bunch of parameters. I'm not going to go into the specific parameters because very specifically, it doesn't matter. Those parameters wouldn't mean anything to you.
Way to say specific a bunch of times.
Yeah, I'm proud of that. But they don't mean anything to you because you'd have to have everything calibrated the way we do and talk the way we do. But basically, it looks through the audio, and whenever it finds a silence that lasts a certain amount of time based on a certain way of detecting silence and way of detecting volume, it'll shorten that period of silence from the center in both directions by 40%. So it'll shorten the pause time between sentences. Not enough to be noticeable. It's not like if I'm dumb and I just go, it gets rid of that. It leaves all that in. All it does is cut out the time when we're breathing sometimes or when there's a slight pause. And it's a really subtle effect. If you listen to one and then listen to the other, you'd be hard pressed to tell, but it cuts a good 15 or 20 seconds out of the show, all told.
Yep. All right, next question. Can you give your own opinions on Blu-ray versus HD DVD? Well, Blu-ray is clearly superior compared to everything else.
When you have that quantum ghost mechanics, you can just put basically infinite data there.
Yeah,
you just can't.
It can go right through walls. It can be transported instantly because you can use the netherworld as a
I think
sort of a wormhole.
The only problem with Blu-ray is that whenever I try to put a disc in, it always flips over.
It won't play unless you put it in backwards. Okay, no. Okay, so Blu-ray, obviously, is what you're asking about versus HD DVD. My opinion is, personally, because I really don't care about HD at all. I mean, the only reason I would consider getting an HD TV is because I want the computer that we have in the living room to actually display at a decent resolution other than 640 by 480 or whatever on the television in the living room. I don't want to watch Blu-ray DVDs. I don't want to watch HD DVDs. DVD is good enough for me. I don't have a surround sound system. I have the speakers in the TV. I don't care.
I guess part of it is that Blu-ray and HD DVD, I mean, when DVD came out, it was such an improvement over VHS in so many ways.
Sort of the same way as CD was an improvement over a cassette. You could skip around really easily. You could pause without jaggy lines.
It didn't melt if I left it in my car on a hot
You
day.
didn't get your VCR all jammed up. You know, you just put the disc. You didn't have to rewind. It was amazingly better.
And I feel like DVD wasn't even near the end of its life when Blu-ray and HD DVD came out, and they're still way too expensive, and the DVD, well, the mediums, they cost more, and
The only improvement is video quality and amount of storage space. And you know what? In terms of storing data for data purposes, a hard drive is a lot better than buying a Blu-ray drive with a bunch of discs.
and even you think, what if I want to archive my stuff and have an offline backup? You know what?
Hard drives.
Fill up a hard drive and unplug it. God damn.
Yeah, just have a pile of hard drives in a little box in your closet or something. Not even like a NAS, just hard drives.
The other thing is, it's just that Blu-ray and HD DVD, already there are theoretical standards that just kick the living shit out of them in terms of storage. And technology is moving so fast that any sort of set media like that is becoming less and less relevant just because everything gets better. And by the time you perfect one standard, a new one that's better is already on the horizon.
I think these are the last or second to last physical entertainment, media transfer media. Before we switch to just all digital transfer, TCP/IP, whatever, and it's going to be the end of it. What we really need is some sort of new digital movie format that's better than MPEG-4, where we can get higher quality videos in less space.
And
that's because think about it. If we could develop that, we might be able to get HD quality video onto a DVD of space. That's where the action is. Better compression.
And we're on our way now because, part of the reason why MP3 came into existence was just that processors were getting fast enough to decode. Generally, the faster processors are, the more you can compress data because you have more
but there
processing.
are limits in terms.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, we're at the limit of our mathematics and not the limit of our processor speed.
Well, I think we're also getting to the limit of making this a short answer to a question.
Yes, we are. So that's what we got to say about that.
All right, so moving on.
We're going to alternate with the questions.
How long do you think Japan will stay ahead of the world in technology? Now, there's a little bit of a false premise there. There is the common perception that Japan is like the end-all, be-all of technology and that they're just so far ahead of the rest of the world. And I believe that is true in terms of consumer technology.
Well, they're not, they're ahead but they're not like number one across the board. There are other countries that have as high or higher technology than Japan in different areas.
A lot of like Scandinavian countries, actually, they're on the forefront of particle physics and all sorts of things. And honestly,
South Korea has a lot of fancy technologies too. Don't put
even
them down.
the United States.
Hong Kong.
Consumer technology may not be up to snuff in the U.S., but our medical research and things like that are unparalleled in many fields. It's really not
You
fair.
can't touch the U.S. in the pharmaceuticals department, that's for sure.
It's not fair to say that Japan is ahead of the world in technology. What I think you mean is why, like, Japan is ahead in terms of, consumer technology, internet stuff. And I think a lot of that perception comes from the fact that Japan culturally is a lot more kind of willing to accept and be on the forefront of consumer technology. They're willing to pay a lot more for a lot less.
I think another part of it is that, generally in terms of consumer technology, there's this thing where, like, smaller is better. I went to the Apple store today. Everything was fucking small. Japan is the land of we need stuff to be small. Therefore, technology will always advance because they're constantly trying to make things smaller there. So they're always going to have the smallest, coolest stuff, and that's just because they need to. In the U.S., we don't even bother because you have so much space. We're just like, yeah, a computer the size of a barn, that's okay with me.
It's kind of like the difference between New York City and Sterling Heights, where I grew up. In New York City, there's no parking lot. There's nothing. There isn't even space. Everything's crammed in as much as it can be. Where I grew up,
Tokyo's twice as bad, supposedly, even though I've never been there. That's what I hear.
Every store I've ever went to had its own parking lot that was bigger than, like, most buildings in New York City. In fact, I could park, like, 8 cars at my house because no one cared. They just wasted the space because space was practically free.
Yep, all right. What would be your ideal electronic reading device? Books, comics, video, photos. Well, I'll tell you, my ideal device would be some sort of imperceptible implant into my brain so it appeared as if holograms are floating around me and I can control them with my thoughts.
Now, it's arguable whether or not that is electronic.
It could be electronic. It's a tiny it's like one nanobot that flies into my brain. There's the electronic part. One nanobot.
You asked ideal, and that's ideal.
Yeah.
Practically.
We're going to answer every question literally.
But I will say, practically in my lifetime, what I would like is just a book. A little book, and when I flip the pages, I just...
You want a primer?
Basically, I want a primer.
Yeah, I would like, though, some sort of floating hologram system, even if I had to reach out and touch it, or if it was like I sit down at my desk, I push a button, a bunch of holograms pop up all over the place. I can grab them with my hands.
When I was a kid, and
grab them, put them on my lap, ride on them.
I was watching Tenchi Muyo, and I remember that Washu, the super scientist, was working on her computer, and basically she snapped, and then a keyboard appeared in her eyes that was just in front of her, and then she had windows all over in the space around her head, and she just dragged them around with her hand and was looking at him, and I'd like that.
All right, you go.
All right. Let's see. Did you ever do the old school overclocking of CPUs and video cards? Did you think, and a follow-up question, do you think Dell would ever eventually walk down the path? Well, did I think Dell would ever walk down the path of overclocking for their customers?
So did they?
There have been, I don't know about Dell specifically because I would never really buy a Dell, but a lot of people who sell components have been marketing them as overclocked to some degree, and there are more and more motherboards that say, check out our overclockable motherboard. But for the first question, I did. Back in the Athlon 800, 700 megahertz days, I bought a K7 to 800 megahertz. Mm-hmm. And I overclocked it to a little under a gigahertz. Yep. And there was a significant and noticeable performance increase, especially because I greatly increased my front side bus speed.
Yep, back in the day, my Pentium 3 450, the first computer I ever built, and the computer I learned most of what I know about PCs on, at least hardware-wise, I overclocked it because I was learning about that stuff, and it was sort of a learning experiment kind of hobby exercise, and then I unoverclocked it because it made it unstable.
See, it didn't make my computer unstable, and once I figured out after a lot of testing exactly how much I could overclock it without it going unstable. And I left it that way until it died. And while the motherboard kind of caught fire and exploded...
I wonder why.
I actually learned later it had nothing to do with my overclocking. It was that A-bit espionage fake fluid in the capacitors problem.
Yeah.
But I think nowadays, to be honest, overclocking is stupid. The incremental cost of getting a faster computer, and also whether or not your software will actually give you a perceptible performance increase, very rarely is that the case.
The only times overclocking actually does something these days are those people who go all out and they freaking make some crazy cooling rig and they overclock something like to insane levels in their labs. And that's not really practical for a normal human being.
Forget that. If you have to buy extra cooling, it'll probably end up costing more than it would have to just buy the faster chip in the first place.
Yep. I guess it's good as like a hobby activity because you kind of learn something and it's kind of fun. But for practical purposes, you're wasting your time. Which goes to the next question. How do I overclock my laptop duo-core processor, and is it safe for the laptop? Well, first, what we just said about overclocking still stands, and for a laptop especially, no! Laptops are like on the brink of like overheating. They have the cooling in those things like so figured out. If you overclock it or somehow manage to do so...
Dude, if you just use a laptop too much, especially like a standard ThinkPad or whatever, it's going to overheat.
Yeah, you put your laptop on your lap. It's warm. It's so warm that it can actually make you sterile if you're a man. So if you overclock it, you're going to break your laptop from overheating, even if the CPU can handle it.
So seriously, don't do it. All right, so do those penis pills I get email offers for really work? No.
In general, please explain this frozen light phenomenon. There's links, but I'm using a piece of paper because my laptop...
Yeah, I'm also using a piece of paper because it's just easier. I didn't actually follow the links, but I'm pretty sure you're referring to that quantum computer thing that's been in the news lately, where basically all this is, really simply, is if you fire light, which is comprised of photons, into a Bose-Einstein condensate, which is basically, there's the forms of matter, solid, liquid, gas... There's a state above gas, higher energy, called plasma, and there's a state below solid called Bose-Einstein condensate. I'm not going to get into how they're formed, but they're really, really cold. And if in certain conditions you shine light, photons, into a Bose-Einstein condensate, effectively the Bose-Einstein condensate will store the quantum state of the photon you fired in, the spin and whatever. And then if you warm up or somehow release or get the Bose-Einstein condensate to regenerate a photon, it'll come out with the same quantum state it went in with. So effectively, you can make a quantum transistor with photons and a Bose-Einstein condensate. The problem is it takes insane amounts of energy and is very difficult to do. And
It's got to be fucking cold, woman.
space is one call. All right.
All right. What's the next one? Oh, many products today are made with nanoparticles, such as khakis that are stain and wrinkle resistant. What is your opinion of nanotech in general, and do you think we'll ever see nanotech like Michael Crichton describes in his novel Prey? Well, I didn't read Prey, so I don't know what you're talking about. And nanotech. Nanotech is cool. I guess that gray goo stuff people talk about could maybe happen, possibly, if someone makes like a nanobot that self-replicates and tears apart anything it sees.
Yeah, but even then, there are viruses that try to do that.
But then again, how fast would it really happen mathematically? And, what kind, it would take so many resources to do something like that just to start it off. It'd be so difficult.
Well, I think there's also a common misconception as to what nanotechnology the word means. Because when people hear nanotech, they immediately think tiny robots that rebuild my arm after it gets cut off with a lightsaber.
Nanobots, which is what we generally think of, are a subset of nanotech. It's like there's nanotech, and one part of nanotech is nanobots. Nanobots is the part I'm interested in, which I like, but there are other parts too.
But when you see these things, oh, this is made with nanotechnology, all that really means is that they made a substance or a surface or something on a molecular level, meaning they made a new substance or a new kind of surface just by laying out atoms in a certain way. And that's how these stain-resistant things worked. And they're marketed as nanotech, partly because of the public conception of nanotech. And they probably know that people will see that word and think, oh man, tiny robots. Oh man, I'm buying these khakis. But on the same token,
they really had tiny robots.
I own a lot of those khakis. And you know what? They don't stain and they don't wrinkle. And I see a great future for technology like this. It's kind of like how the space program brought us a bunch of great stuff. But you know what? It also brought us Tang. And you get a lot of very mundane technology from very sci-fi cool sounding things. This is just one aspect of that.
All right, you go.
All right. All right, this question, there were a bunch of questions people asked that were basically, hey, Raymond Scott, something about science that you probably don't know. Well,
we know.
Why does a mirror appear to invert the left-right directions but not the up-down?
I know.
Do you know? I think everyone who's ever studied physics knows.
Like a mirror bounces light straight out. So the light comes in, the light goes out the way it came in directly.
So it doesn't invert left, right, or up, down, or anything. It inverts front to back.
Yeah, so if light bounces off your left arm and goes to the mirror, it then bounces straight back off the mirror, and thus you see your left arm on your left. But normally when you look at a human being, their right arm is on your left because they're turned around looking at you. And that's how it goes.
It's as though the image were put on a two-dimensional plane that was then inverted front to back, and you view that.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
All right. Why are the strengths of the fundamental forces, electromagnetism, weak and strong forces, and gravity, what they are? For example, why is the fine structure constant that measures the strength of electromagnetism about 1/137.036? Where do such dimensionless constants come from? Or is this an unanswerable question?
It's actually pretty simple. Those are the four things because that's what we've observed. Those numbers are what they are because that's what we've observed. We've observed them as long as we've been observing these numbers. The better we've been able to measure, the better they've been. We see these numbers everywhere. Yeah. We see these forces everywhere. It works.
Yeah, it's not really a why. That's the way it is. That's what we see. And it's like, why is a basketball orange? Because you look at it and it looks orange.
It's arbitrary. We've measured four kinds of forces. We've never observed anything else. We basically took everything we've observed, discovered that we can break them up into these four ways, and that if we just stick these numbers in, the math all works. That's it.
There's no why. It's just that's what it is.
All right. Why is there an arrow of time? That is, why is the future so much different from the past? Well, why is the past so much different from the future? We don't even really understand what time is, and time in some ways can act like a spatial dimension. So it's whether or not there is an arrow of time doesn't matter. We as thinking beings that may or may not just be the emergence of a complex system perceive time, and as far as we know, that's the end of it.
Okay. Would you guys recommend a Mac to other people? I would recommend a Mac to someone who knows nothing about computers, so they couldn't possibly, set one up very easily. And they don't need to do anything that a Mac doesn't do, because there are many things a Mac doesn't do, like play games, record podcasts. If you're just a normal user who's, going to do some web browsing and some IMing and all that stuff and iTunesing, and you got money to burn, and you're not interested in learning anything or doing anything difficult or anything at all, and you care what your computer looks like, then a Mac is for you.
Or if you need a little PC to go in your living room.
Yeah, I guess.
Or if you're an artist, because if you're an artist and you don't want to deal with the crap of a PC, all that software runs on the Mac just as well. And
Well, at least Photoshop and some things, but some things don't. Most
of the things that artists are going to use, except for very specific fields.
Yep.
Yeah, Macs are pretty cool. I mean, we own one.
Visual artists.
Yes. Though audio too, as long as you're not doing exactly what we're doing. All right, this one might seem a little out there, but do you guys believe that humanity will eventually be able to live on other planets?
In other planets? It says in.
Yes, probably not. Well, maybe inside of a gas giant, like the Cloud City.
I think the problem is not so much living in the planet or on the planet, but is getting there with the stuff to live there.
And there are really two main components to that. Will humans be able to put forth that monumental effort? I mean, we think, oh, we went to the moon, so long ago in the 60s. How come we don't go back? And I don't think people realize the sheer amount of human resource and opportunity cost and just money and time. And it was one of the most concentrated and concerted efforts humanity's ever put forth to get to the moon once or twice. And the moon is very, very, very close to us compared to any other planet out there. And I think we could get there if, one, humans don't destroy each other, humans stop wasting resources on bullshit, and even then, it might not be possible.
Bullshit like podcast?
Yeah, it might even not be possible. There might not be enough accessible energy in our planet to escape in any meaningful way. It's very hard to know if we can or not, and I think all we can do is try. Because we have to think kind of, that the famous sci-fi short story, The Last Question. You always have to kind of think about, all right, what will we do in the long term? And by the long term, I mean when the sun runs out. And I don't know if humans with our short lifespans, or relatively short lifespans compared to the world around us, are capable of that. And I want to be optimistic and say that we are, but I'm also kind of pessimistic and think that we aren't. And Osamu Tezuka talks about that a lot.
He does. All right. Keep going.
All right. What is your take on multivitamins? Are they fluff? Do we need them? Are we getting everything we need from a proper, well-balanced diet? Well, if you're eating a proper, well-balanced diet, then you don't need multivitamins.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain vitamins that, yes, you need to eat them. For example, if you never eat vitamin C, you will get scurvy. That is the end of it. So, if you do not eat any oranges or fruits or anything with vitamin C in it, you should probably eat a vitamin C pill now and then, consult a doctor for exactly how much and how often. But in general, I think a lot of people taking multivitamins who also eat properly, because they think they're all healthy, they're getting a lot of extra vitamins, which can sometimes be good, sometimes not do anything at all, and sometimes be bad. It's ask a nutritionist. What do I look like?
I don't think multivitamins are terribly dangerous because they don't, they're not in and of themselves an overdose. But I think the worst problem is people who take like a 10,000% dose of vitamin C.
Yeah,
not a good idea.
Yeah, like taking like a Flintstones vitamin when you were a kid is probably a good idea. Taking like the 1,000 milligram vitamin B is probably a bad idea.
Yep, and vitamin A is toxic in large quantities, like super toxic.
Yep.
But I mean, I take a multivitamin about every 3 or 4 days, and part of the reason I do that is just that I don't eat the best diet all the time, and I know there's things I'm missing, and I figure that kind of rounds me out. If my body's really missing something, it'll get it from there. But
I just don't take vitamins because I do, unless maybe I'll get some Flintstones vitamins.
Yeah.
Oh, and if anyone tries to tell you the vitamin B16 cures cancer, just kick them in the balls.
Yes.
If they have them, otherwise punch them in the face.
Oh, here's a good one.
Okay, you mentioned before about how bad the aluminum in deodorant is and recommend the natural kind. I couldn't find this at the local grocery store the last time I went. Do you have a link or the name of the brand you use that you could share? Okay, so We don't recommend the, quote, natural kind. What's the name of the chemical?
Oh, well, there's a bunch of chemicals.
Right. But basically...
Triclosan is one of them, but that's also
Triclosan is not the one I'm thinking of.
But there's a bunch. Generally, it's always made of dipropylene glycol, and...
That's the one.
And there's a bunch of other chemicals. Really, all you need to look at is one. You don't want something that says antiperspirant, because that means it basically contains aluminum shards that plug your pores up.
That's how antiperspirant works. Pretty much any antiperspirant you buy at the store is shards of aluminum, and they shred up your pores in your armpits or any other parts.
Well, really what they do is they react with the salts in your sweat, and they form plugs that block your pores.
Yeah, it's not good. It's bad for you, and in fact, if you use antiperspirant a lot, the more you use it, the more you need it.
I'll give you an anecdote. When I was a kid, I used to get super sweat, and I had sweat stains all the time, and I used antiperspirant to try to stop that. And if I didn't like smear antiperspirant on, I got horrible sweat, and then I started sweating through the antiperspirant. It was really bad. And I went to a doctor, and he said, just stop using antiperspirant. And I said, but then I'll sweat a lot. He's like, yeah, for about a week, and then your body will adjust, and you'll sweat like a normal human being, and you won't need antiperspirant anymore.
It's sort of like if your hair is oily, and you keep washing it, it gets oilier. You keep washing it, it gets oilier. If you just let it stay oily for a few days, your head will just reabsorb the extra oil.
Well, it's more that your body will just kind of react and not do what Donnie Don't does.
Your head releases all that grease because you just washed all the grease away, and your head goes, oh my God, there's no grease. Grease it up, woman. Yeah, so
Have you got any grease?
So
grease me up, woman.
So just go to the grocery store
and
buy anything that says deodorant and doesn't say antiperspirant on it. It doesn't have to be natural. That's just a word that's for marketing to try to trick hippies into
Basically,
buying it.
what you want is anything that contains... Because the way deodorant works, real deodorant, is that it contains a bunch of chemicals that are usually harmless, and they kill or inhibit the growth of bacteria. As a result,
the smelly bacteria.
You still sweat, but the sweat doesn't smell. And if you use deodorant and you still smell, then that means that you've got some sort of chemical imbalance, or you're not eating enough and you're in the early stages of ketosis.
You should see a doctor or something.
Or, I mean, if you're working out and losing weight, then that's just kind of the natural thing. But
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I use Degree, the body heat activated whatever. I just pick a color. There's like green, blue, and different blue.
I use the Adidas barely scented deodorant.
Well, don't use the Arm & Hammer.
I also use the Arm & Hammer, whatever. You know what? I use whatever deodorant. You can get completely odorless deodorant. All it is an antibacterial. There's no smell at all.
Yep. And don't buy anything that's too, like, if it says, like, quartz, crystal, magic something, or that's super hippie stuff that doesn't really work.
I mean, you can use certain kinds of salt crystals, and they actually work really well. The problem is they don't work as well as real deodorant, but they do work.
Yeah, so dipropylene glycol is what you're looking for. And the ingredients. Check the ingredients.
A lot of them have triclosan in them, just any kind of antibacterial.
Make sure the ingredients doesn't say aluminum. All right. Next question.
All right. I have a hardware raid, and I never could get Ubuntu outside of VMware because there weren't any drivers. I came across some, I'm paraphrasing.
Yep.
I came across some source code, but I have no idea how to compile it, what to do with it, even if I do compile it. Don't know anything about Linux. Which is why I wanted to install it in the first place, so I can learn how to use it. Any other option? Should I just emulate? Blah, 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 blah.
This is a common problem, not this particular thing, but in general, that someone wants to do something, right? And if you just want to learn things one step at a time. For example, a guy the other day was having a problem with like an htaccess file on his web server, right? And you know, if you already know a whole bunch of stuff and you just need to learn htaccess files on their own, that's not a difficult concept to grasp. The problem is you need a lot of prerequisite knowledge before you can learn that easily. So unless you already know like how to get around a Linux command line and how to compile a program and how to, use make and how to, you know your way around the Linux file system and how to configure a Linux kernel, then I can teach you how to do this very easily. It's just, one more thing to learn. The problem is you don't know any of the prerequisite knowledge. It's like this mountain of knowledge. You only want to know one thing, the thing at the top of the mountain, and which is really easy once you're already a step away from the top of the mountain, but you're at the bottom of the mountain. So for me to teach you, I'd have to carry you up the whole mountain like a fucking Sherpa. So either spend a whole lot of time learning a whole lot of stuff so that you can learn to build the Linux kernel and configure it and how to compile source code and everything, or just keep using your VMware until someone does it for you.
I hate to say this, but the simple answer, like Scott was saying, is basically just if you don't want to deal with all the crap about Linux, and the Linux you try to install doesn't just work with your hardware or maybe just work with like really simple stuff you find on a forum somewhere, I hate to say this, but it's probably not worth it to bother.
Unless you really want to learn, in which case start climbing.
All right, I think that's enough of that.
Yep.
Well,
How far off do you think we are from a world like that in Ghost in the Shell universe? What, if any, cyber enhancements would you guys get installed?
Well, we'll tackle the first one first, because this is something I think about a lot. I really, really, really like the Ghost in the Shell universe and all the writing and the shows and the anime and everything, because I think it's a good balance of action and procedural cop stuff and hard, good sci-fi.
Yep, I like it too.
Also a lot of Shirotasm, which means more things than you might think.
Not as much Shirotasm as, say, Dominion or the most Shirotastic Orion.
God, Dominion, where it's like funny, 4 pages of talking about that. But anyway, the Ghost in the Shell universe is interesting because in some ways our world is nowhere near it or even close to it. But in other ways, I think our world is already there or scarily closer to it than I'm almost comfortable with.
Yep.
I mean, in terms of the technology, like cyber brains and all that, that's a long ways off. But at the same time, it's not as far off as you might think. I don't think we're going to get there in our lifetime in terms of, cyber brains and all that stuff. But at the same time, I really think we're only a generation or two away from a world like that.
Yep. Now, what cyber enhancements would I get installed? Personally, I think it's cool. People with cyber stuff, that's awesome. But I'm the only thing I fear is surgeries and medical action. So I would really fear getting any sort of unnecessary medical surgery, especially some sort of electronic, the things that I would want too, internet in the brain would be really dangerous. What if there's, a bug problem, a virus, or, I don't want that. It's too risky for me. So,
well, it's like in Ghost in the Shell where the people who have a cyber brain, every now and then the Major hacks them.
Yeah, and it's their control software for their arm doesn't work, so they need to upgrade it or stuff like that. So
I think for me,
I would be like Togusa. I would hold off as long as possible.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more that, well, I'll assume the Ghost in the Shell universe is true, because the one thing about this universe that I find interesting is that there's a lot of questions about what is consciousness and what is there a soul, and if there is, what defines it, and all that sort of thing. And if you go with what the Ghost in the Shell universe's science works like, meaning consciousness is a thing that can be transferred verifiably, then I would probably, when I was old or when my body was dying, or I would totally just dump my consciousness into a cyborg and keep living.
If I'm dying, everything changes.
Even if I wasn't dying, I could see myself going fully cyberized relatively early, because
if I'm old, everything changes.
Even if I wasn't old, even now, when I got, my mid-20s, I'd already be thinking about fully cyberizing.
Nah, I wouldn't be doing that now.
But on a more fundamental level, back to the first part of the question, while we're not there in terms of technology, in terms of the social theory of the Ghost in the Shell universe and information dissemination and a lot of what they talk about in terms of terrorism and ideas and memes and, second order simulacra and all those, phenomenon and social theory that they talk about, I see those things happening in our world now. And I think that the world right now in 2007, if you really watch Ghost in the Shell, is scarily similar to that in terms of how ideas disseminate. And I think that our world is changing a lot faster than a lot of us realize.
All right, ask the next question.
All right. If you guys had the choice of any one hard science to study and get into, no matter how broad or specialized, what would you pick and why?
Physics, it's the only hard science.
Physics.
Take that, scientists.
I would argue that all science boils down to physics in the end.
Yeah, biology is organic chemistry is physics.
To me, chemistry is literally just a kind of simplified macro view of physics. It's we look at it at a high level and it works, but it can all be explained physically.
Bring it on, biologists. I know you're going to come at me on this one, but physics is the only hard science, end of story.
And honestly, I was really good at physics, and I almost went into it.
I was okay.
I had physics parties in high school and calculus parties, and I was super into integrating stuff for fun. And that sounds really nerdly, but fuck you.
All right.
All right. I guess you can do this one.
What do you think is the biggest technological problem humans will face in the coming years?
I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, it is a really good question, and it's kind of tough. I mean, there could be a few technological problems. It depends, because the problem is things we don't know now. If I knew now, well, I guess then it wouldn't be a problem. It could be running out of energy. It could be I don't know. We can't make. It could be the fact that just technology slows down, like it stops improving because we hit some sort of wall. We can't make transistors any smaller. We've hit our limit of what we can do.
Yep. I mean, ignoring non-technological, like purely tech problems, ignoring, humanity and all the crap we do to each other all the time. My guess, and I mean, there's no way to answer this with any authority. My random guess would be that energy is going to be the biggest problem we're going to face in the coming years, like in the near future. Long term, I think the problem we're going to face is that it takes increasing amounts of energy to observe smaller and smaller particles and quantum things. And I think we're going to get to the point where it becomes prohibitively difficult to observe smaller quanta.
Yeah. In the long run, I think the general problem is going to be limits. Like, for example, limits to how much data we can get per square inch or per square centimeter.
Or
once we hit the limit, we can't get any more data in any less space, no matter how much we compress it, then we still might need to store even more data. We're just going to run out of physical room, and there's nothing we could do about it.
See, there's this whole theory of the simulation hypothesis that if we understood the physics of our world perfectly, and we could create an emulator of our physics, then there's nothing to say that that we couldn't just be a simulation in someone else's world somewhere and all that business. But there's an alternative idea as a kind of a corollary or a question that goes along those lines that it's possible that the amount of energy it takes to make those calculations is in effect the combined effort of the universe as a whole, meaning that the emulation is the system itself, and it's kind of this circular thing.
Well, that's the assumption is that we want to emulate our existing universe. We could emulate a smaller part of the universe, and then the things in that universe would say, is there a limit to our universe? And we'd be like, yes, it's only like 2 solar systems. That's all we can do.
But I guess what Scott was getting at is that the longest term problem I think humanity is going to face are, like Scott was getting at, those hard constants. I mean, quite literally, I think the end run of humanity is going to be the second law of thermodynamics, Planck's constant, and the speed of light.
Yep.
And I don't think we have the capability of thinking beyond that.
Okay.
All right, what do you think are some important non-tech skills in the tech world job school?
Talking to people.
Communication, number 1, far and away. If you can't give a business presentation without getting nervous, if you can't write effectively,
if you can't go up and if you're a technologist, if you can't go up to a non-technologist, talk to them and figure out what the hell they really want, that's going to be a problem because some manager is going to come up and tell you to do something. You're going to be sitting there, The second thing I think you need to do is research. You need to be able to learn shit fast.
Yes, like that's one thing that was great about going to RIT is when we learned about routing and switching, we didn't learn jack all about Cisco, and they avoided talking about the specifics of any implementation of pretty much any technology at all. And the point they made was that if you know the fundamentals of coding, of networking, of anything computer-wise, then it's trivial to learn the specifics of any one protocol.
Yep, like I learned object-oriented programming. They taught it with Java, but they taught us object-oriented programming in class and the fundamentals thereof. So I could get a book with an animal on it for any object-oriented programming language, look in the book to get the syntax, and I can write software in any object-oriented programming language.
I learned routing and switching and network design. It doesn't matter if I'm using Cisco or Linux boxes with NICs in them. I know the fundamentals. I can make anything network.
So research and communications. Okay.
Oh, this is a good one for Scott.
What do you think about the technological singularity? Is it possible? Will we reach it? If so, in our lifetime. All right. This is an interesting idea to think about, the technological singularity, the idea that, somehow, I guess an Evangelion type of thing, they'll be like Google will become God or some shit like that, and all the knowledge will join together.
It's like the idea of, could humanity, because of information sharing or because of information technology, not IT, but like information technology in a broad sense, fundamentally change humanity kind of to the point that a human today couldn't comprehend it?
Right. The people who are going around like, oh, it's coming, like that Ray Kurzweil asshole, you're all full of shit and you're a bunch of nut jobs, all right? It's one thing to say, oh, this is interesting to think about, like The Matrix. Oh, this is interesting to think about. To say, we're in it for sure. It's coming. We're in there. You're a nut job. Go home. I'm tired
Plus,
of you.
I'll make this point. It's a point I make a lot. If you took a scholar from ancient Rome, or hell, Greece, ancient Greece, and you took them to our modern world, and they would look around and say, that's a road. That's some kind of chariot. That's a house. That's a bathroom. I don't think humans are that fundamentally different from those humans. And if there was a technological singularity, I think that the last one that happened was probably caveman to hunter-gatherer. Like something that fundamental.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, it's just that technological singularity is a lot of technobabble and not a lot of actual. It's kind of like
it's the stuff of Neil Stephenson novels and not the stuff of the real world.
Oh, here we go. Did the Native Americans treat trade with the Europeans in when they first made contact?
What?
That sentence was a masterpiece.
Okay.
In what ways did the two cultures differ in trading technology, and how did the trade practice affect the dissemination of technology among Native Americans? Blah, 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 blah.
This sounds like someone's asking us the question from their homework that they have to write an essay on.
I'm not going to answer the question, but I'm going to make the point that it kind of relates to the previous question in that there seems to be this trend in humanity for as long as humans have existed, and I never really thought about it much until the other day. I have this book that's a collection of essays on colonialism, and I was reading about the ancient Egyptians and their colonial relationship with what was effectively called Nubia, or miserable Kush. And I'm not going to get into that, but it's kind of funny. But it seems that the history of humanity has always had this pattern of one culture will be effectively beyond another culture in all ways, in terms of civilization, in terms of technology, in terms of strength. And I don't think there's really ever been a case where a very primitive society has met with a relatively advanced society and come out better for it.
Yeah, I mean, and you really think about this, right? If aliens, so let's say extraterrestrials of some sort, come to Earth and they are an advanced, race that is, to us the same way that, say, colonial Europeans were to Native Americans, that's what's going to happen to us, most likely. Unless the aliens are just so different from humanity in ways we can't comprehend currently.
And also, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to get into it. I could do a whole show about this crap, but I don't know how I feel about these sort of interactions, because on one hand, I almost weep at the horrible things that colonial powers have done to primitive people pretty much as long as humanity's existed. I mean, the ancient Greeks got rid of the natives there, and, there's the Doric invasions, and, when Britain colonized India, not much good came of that. And then partition, that was horrible. But on the other hand, and I hate to say this, but I look at these civilizations that were so, I guess, relatively primitive, and I wonder if we're better off having been civilized or not. And sometimes I feel yes, and sometimes I feel no. And
Unabomber. Okay.
I look at the great works that civilization, like the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Persians, and the ancient China, and, the art and the literature and all these beautiful things, and the civilization, that none of this could have happened without the kind of subjugation and conquering of the weaker powers around. And I don't know. It's a complicated issue, and I can't talk about more without derailing this whole thing.
Doesn't the Heisenberg uncertainty principle state that as you increase the precision of your measurement of position, you lose accuracy on the particle's velocity and vice versa?
Pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you look at by measuring one thing, you are uncertain about the other.
But it's not just, people think of it as just that one thing. The uncertainty principle really relates to a whole bunch of these kind of binary pairs of, if we measure this, then we screw up that, and vice versa. And it's actually a lot more complicated than that, and is really outside of the purview of this show.
Yeah, to simplify it in a way a commoner can understand, right? Imagine you're looking at something in a microscope, right? You're looking at it, but the light comes through the microscope and gets focused on the thing you're looking at it, and the light kind of zaps it, and now it's different. So by looking at it, you sort of changed it. So you can't look at it with a microscope in the way it was before you put it under the microscope, because looking at it changes it.
Now, the simpler but scarier part of that is that's a good analogy, but the problem is analogies don't work for quantum physics.
No, they
I
don't.
think the famous quote
I'm trying to make it so it's...
I know. I think the famous quote is, if you think you understand quantum physics, then you obviously don't.
I think it was more like something like, something about anyone understands it, no one understands it.
Yeah, but the scarier answer is kind of that the ideas of causality start to break down on that micro scale, to the point that we really can't know where a particle is. We only know that it's like particles aren't just particles, they're also waves. And they act like a wave sometimes and a particle other times, and we don't know why. We really don't know, and it's scary to a lot of people.
Okay.
Right. Will there ever be a working quantum computer? There already is. It's very slow.
Okay. If you were going to try to design a Linux-based virus, how would you go about it? It sounds like a whole episode to me, but generally the thing about, I mean, there are Linux, I guess, quote, viruses. There are malwares for Linux. There are rootkits, and there are spy things and all sorts of stuff. The problem is, how do you get it onto the computer, and how do you get it root permissions? That's the trick, because every Linux machine is different, and they're all really secure, and it's very difficult to get things to run with super user permissions without that super user password.
Yep. I mean, all viruses do is if you can ever execute code with any level of authority on a computer, you've compromised it. All viruses are the same at that point.
Yep. It's just, on Linux, it is very, very difficult to pick a random Linux box that could be running who knows what version of the kernel, who knows what version of SSH. And if they're updated all the way, how are you going to find a hole in it that you can exploit to get access to the machine?
Plus, just on a general sense, the security schema and how Linux and Unixes and all those things handle security and permissions is very robust, and it's very difficult to get around that.
So what I would do is I would wait for there to be an announced bug in like Red Hat something, and then already have machines like, I know that, hey, that server I want is running Red Hat version X, and then go for it. But to get something to spread to all Linux machines around, almost impossible, because they're all running different versions of everything.
Now, what I would do is, a lot of people are starting to use Linux and don't understand it, is I'd set up websites that explained how people in a common thing like Red Hat or Ubuntu could get a bunch of cool software by adding a certain repository or installing a certain deb as root. And I just make it a Trojan horse, and I could only get stupid people or inexperienced people.
Until someone made an announcement about it, in which case you just move somewhere else and try the same trick again.
But even then, it's tough to do that, because even then
you get all the nub Ubuntu users,
but not even that,
it.
because the people who aren't savvy enough to know that that's bad aren't savvy enough to add a repository.
Well, you make it like automatics. All those dumb people install automatics, it just screws you up and isn't necessary anymore. You just make something like that and put a virus in it.
True. The problem is there'd be more Google hits on "this is bad" than there would be on this.
It's true. Okay.
All right. Why is the world we live in today so different from the world of the future that all old sci-fi authors wrote about? Pocket supercomputers are nice and all, but I was really looking forward to space colonies and personal hover cars, period, space, colon, right paren.
Well, because when you think about, when you write science fiction, anything that you can conceive of being in the future, you make science fiction about, and that's what we conceived of. We can conceive of moon bases. We can conceive of bases on all sorts of planets and rocket ships.
I think a lot of it is when you look, unless you're very forward thinking, you look at what exists around you and try to extend that into the future. Like, we've got driving cars. Well, why not flying cars? We've got very primitive televisions. Why not bigger televisions?
Yeah, and what is possible and what actually is practical versus what you can conceive of are very different.
I think the other part of it is that science is not this kind of linear progression of just,
we want it, we get it. We want it, we get it.
It's more this, things progress at a really fast then slow, then fast then slow. There'll be a period of very little advancement, and then suddenly there'll be a breakthrough and then a crazy rush. And also the fact that science has been advancing in pretty much all fields exponentially to the point that the world of today, I mean, think about it. It was less than 10 years ago that hardly anyone had a cell phone. It was less than 20 years ago that fucking no one had a cell phone.
Yep.
Think about how dependent we are on cell phones now. Like, conceive of a world where you can't
meanwhile, it took thousands of years just to get the normal phone, and a shitty one at that.
And yet that fundamentally changed the world in ways almost as much as how the internet has changed the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, let's see what we got here.
The sex one.
Okay. How has technology changed the way we have and experience sex? How do you perceive it changing in the future? Well, how has it changed the way we have and experience sex? Well, you got all sorts of fancy sex toys. You got people spreading info about their fetishes on the internet. So you got porns all over the place now.
Very
people,
scarily specific porns.
Yeah, anyone with a kink, used to be if you had a kink, you just kind of kept it to yourself. Now with the internet, you can find someone who has the same kink and get it on. So everyone's, dirty sex whatnots or clean sex whatnots are all coming out into the open and everyone's letting loose.
And I think that's great. I think this kind of prudish, Victorian style, Puritan, sex is dirty.
Victorian era, they didn't have sex then.
Yeah, but at the same time, there was such a stigma, and it was hard to be open about sex. And I think that just the biggest change technology has made in terms of sex is the increased openness about it.
How will it change in the future? I think there's going to be I don't know. Really, I mean, how much more? I mean, sex is one thing. It really hasn't changed. All we can do is help people have more of it and help people have it better.
Well, unless we get the Ghost in the Shell world, where then...
I guess, yeah, but sex is just going to be more people who have it, who want it, are going to get it, and they're going to have it better. It's going to feel better, and there's going to be new ways to do it, like all sorts of sex machines and toys and porns and God knows what.
Right, so in his book, The Fountains of Paradise by Arthur C. Clarke, he described the construction of a, quote, space elevator. What do you think about this idea? I think it's a great idea in terms of the science and technology. I don't know how feasible it is. I'm not a space engineer. But we really need a practical purpose for it, and I really am not an authority, so I can't say more than that.
Yeah, what Rim said. Generally, I like the idea, I guess, theoretically, right? You could take some sort of cable, and because the Earth spins, if you put the cable in the right spot, you could have the cable stay out just by the centripetal force. You put a weight on the end of it.
And you could just send satellites up.
And you could just send stuff up and down this cable. That's theoretical that you could do that, and that sounds like a good idea to me, but how feasible is it really? Who knows? Someone else figured that out. Not me. I don't know about aerospace engineering.
All right.
Alrighty. I'm losing my spot here.
I know it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's your question.
Oh, I know it's possible, but is it practical to build a Linux-based home file server that goes to standby or hibernate when not in use and use the wake on LAN function when it is needed again? Well, I guess that could be possible. I see no reason why it is not technologically possible. However, in the Linux kernel in general, wake on LAN, standby, and hibernate are kind of fickle. I mean, depending on exactly what motherboard. I mean, the desktop I have at work, this Dell, if I shut down in Ubuntu, it doesn't actually power down the machine. It just kind of stops, and then I have to push the power button. So handling the powering on and off of a machine in Linux, it does work in many cases, but it is quite fickle, and you're going to have to fiddle with a lot of stuff, and you're just better off just make a Linux home file server and leave it on all the time. I mean, is it really killing you that much to leave it on? So if you really want to save electricity, I guess, you could just turn it off manually. Or you can spend a lot of time and figure out exactly what hardware is very compatible with Wake on LAN and Hibernate, and then figure out how to configure that. It's possible.
I think a better solution if you want that kind of functionality is seriously to just buy a consumer NAS that'll handle all that for you.
Yeah, you can get like the Drobo or something.
All right. This is an easy one. As an intermediate computer user, I've never gotten into using Linux. What's the best way to keep my current PC functionality but try out Linux?
I've gone over this like a zillion times.
Ubuntu Boot CD, live CD.
Yes,
that's it.
The concept of a live CD. You burn a CD. It's very easy, even though a lot of people seem to screw that part up. Learn how to deal with an ISO file. Get an ISO file from Ubuntu.com. Burn it to a CD. If you can't handle that, they'll send you a CD for free that's already burned. Put the CD in your computer. Turn your computer on. While the CD is in there, and that's it. You can try out Linux. It won't touch your computer. You could take the CD out, restart your computer. It's like you never had Linux. You can try it out for no risk and no money. That's all I ask from people. Do it. God, how many times do I have to say this?
All right. That was easy.
On my computer, video doesn't play well. It lags badly or it's pink and orange. I tried lots of media players, got codecs, and Googled the problem with no success. Is it just the video card? Some other problem with my PC? Something I should install? I love this question because there's something a lot of people don't know about.
Yep, I didn't know about it when I was in high school, and I had problems with some MPEG decoder cards, and I finally found out, and
this could be a spyware or a virus or something. It could be broken hardware. It could be a lot of things. However, there's something I want to teach you about right now. This is called the overlay. When your computer draws video on the screen, in memory on the video card is called the frame buffer, right? And basically, let's say you have a screen that's 4 pixels by 4 pixels, and they could each be black or white. So that's 1 bit per pixel. So that's either 1 for black or, 1 for white and 0 for black, and 4 by 4, so it's 16. So there'd be 16 bits of data in your video card, and if, the first one is a 1, then the top left pixel will be white. And if the second one is a 0, the second to top left pixel will be black. And that's how your video card works, is it has enough memory to store all the colors for your entire screen, and it just changes that memory, and then that memory gets sent to your monitor, which draws it.
Scott took a class on this, so listen to him.
Yes, and when you say double buffering, when they talk about double buffering, you actually have twice as much of that memory. You draw the next frame to be rendered to the monitor to one of them, and then you swap them, and then you draw, and then you swap. That way, you don't like draw half the screen. You draw the whole screen at once. You draw, swap, draw, swap. Now, for when you're playing video on your computer, there's actually another buffer that's separate. That's why when you try to take a screenshot when your video player is playing, the screenshot program, all it does is copy the data in the normal frame buffer to a file, like a bitmap or a PNG or a JPEG. The video is not in the frame buffer, the normal frame buffer. It's in the overlay buffer, which is completely separate. If you go into the control panel for your video card, you will notice all these overlay settings, and that will change settings only for video playing and stuff like that. So, if you're having color problems on video only, if you're having crashing problems on video only, there might be a problem with the overlay part of your video card or the settings for the overlay in your video card driver, which is a separate buffer that is written to very quickly, because video is when you're playing video, it's not like your monitor where maybe a small part will change, a small part will change, a small part will change, where your mouse is or where you're moving a window around. It's an area of the screen that is constantly changing very rapidly with lots of colors and maybe not lots of resolution. So that's put in a separate buffer that works differently, that is optimized for video playing, and you need to fix it.
Partly, a lot of this was much more of an issue back in the day when computers weren't fast enough to play MPEG or DVDs. You had to have a separate hardware chip that did that for you, and your screen, if you played a video that was running in one of those overlays and you tried to take a screenshot, if you looked at the screenshot, where the overlay would be just like a gray box.
Yep. Because in your frame buffer, your normal frame buffer that draws everything else in your computer, it is just a gray box. But the overlay is drawing video on top of it. Okay.
All right, I'm going to warn you, this next one might sound a little bit like an ego stroke, but we're really freaking good at what we do. All right, so it's a long question, too. I heard you guys mention at the end of the show that getting your podcast out is automatic, a push of a button. I can see how scripts work for most of this, but does that automation include audio editing? For example, removing long ahs and ums or editing out other parts? Or are you guys that good you don't need to take second takes? If the latter is true, I'm pretty impressed since you guys always seem so prepared each show, no floundering and smooth. 1, yes, we are that awesome. We really don't say and ah in a bad way.
We used to be not so awesome.
Listen to old Geeknights and you can hear where I edited shit out, but we haven't done that for over a year.
Yeah, doing a podcast 4 nights a week, you know what? You get fucking good at it. It's called practice.
I mean, I'm going to say this right now. This current show that you've been listening to for about an hour, we have not edited a single thing out.
It's already an hour?
Yeah. Don't worry. I figured out where we're going to stop, and the rest is going to be in a separate show in the future.
Oh, my God. We're not even like page 3 yet.
I know. But seriously, in the previous hour, not only we did not edit anything out other than the, shortened silences filter, which removed maybe 15 seconds total of silence. Not a single word, not a single cough, not a single and or. Literally, I'm going to hit stop, and then I'm going to make an MP3 out of that.
So, if you want to avoid the audio editing, because basically the automatic part is just filters and publishing and ID3s and stuff like that. If you want to not have to edit out ums and ahs, don't and ah. Keep practicing. Podcast a lot. Podcasting once a week is probably not enough to get your good practice on.
Yep. I mean, we don't edit anything out. And even further, I just bring this up for this question show, other than, just going through the questions real quick to weed out the stupid ones, we didn't do research. We didn't look anything up. And in fact, Scott's sitting there with no computer. And the only thing I've had open for the last hour is Resound so I can watch the levels. And we both just have a piece of paper with a bunch of questions on it. No research, no nothing. We answered this stuff off the top of our heads.
All right.
And in terms of the filter, I will talk about this a little bit. What the filter does is it's actually, I think, well, not the filter, but the automatic podcasting. We make the show in 3 files. So we record the first half of the show. We stop for a second. We record the second half of the show. We stop for a second. Then we record, the opener. I'm Rim. I'm Scott. And this is Geeknights.
Your mom.
Tonight we talked about your mom and all the things about your mom. And yeah. And then I have a script that just takes all these files, runs all inside of Resound, like a macro, runs all the filters that need to be run, and then because the show's pretty straightforward, it just takes and copy pastes and overlays and puts the whole show together, throws all the sound effects in, makes an MP3, and then I run a Python script that adds the ID3, does all the other stuff, and then uploads the file.
And then we make a blog post in WordPress by hand because I haven't found a way to make that easier because WordPress is actually kind of shitty.
Yep.
What's the least expensive way to start and host a forum? Well, you go to one of those websites that says, like, free forum, and you sign up.
Can you please comment on why evolutionists continue to believe in the dogmatic principles of Darwinism instead of embracing the obvious truth of his magnificence?
Well, evolutionists, they so stubborn. They refuse to believe things unless they have physical, empirical evidence.
I mean,
for
how
them.
crazy is that? They want evidence before they believe something? That's why they're so dogmatic.
Right, so, they find all these evidence of Darwinism, and they haven't found, according to them, any evidence for his magnificence.
So I guess he, in proving his magnificence, I mean, he'd really only have to find one piece of evidence, and then the dogmatic principles of Darwinism would just come crashing down, but they haven't yet.
All right.
All right. I guess Scott can ask this one.
When will this DRM crap end?
When you stop buying it. Consumers have the ultimate power in terms of media. If you don't buy DRM crap, DRM will disappear practically overnight.
And the thing is, you got to think about DRM as the whole, right? Sure, if we stop buying DRM MP3s and stop buying DRM movies, then those will stop. But DRM also means iPhone that's locked down or iPod that you can't copy MP3s off of. There's other things that DRM means. And as long as you keep buying products that are restricted in functionality, then companies will continue to say, hey, people will buy stuff that doesn't have the full functionality.
If Apple had released the iPhone, and no one had bought it,
and
Apple would have said,
then with market research, they found out it's because it wasn't open. Then you bet your ass they would have opened that iPhone with firmware update number 1.
Apple and Verizon, all these companies, well, maybe not Verizon, but Apple at least, it's not like they're evil. It's just that they know you'll buy it anyway. So why bother? It's the same thing with Nintendo.
It's only more work for them to not restrict stuff.
The Wii could be better than it is, but
DRM on music and movies is already ending. But DRM, that DRM requires them to do extra. But DRM that requires them to do more is not going to go away until we make them with money.
So, this is kind of related. Will the music industry ever get their shit together?
No, they're already dying. Look at what's going on right now.
We have to clarify. By the music industry, I'm going to take that to mean the current system of basically the music industry is comprised of 3 components. On one end, we have consumers, and then the other end, we have content producers. The industry is the middle part that does all the marketing and promotion and crap that is, because of the internet, largely becoming obsolete.
I think in time, people who make music and are talented at doing so will be able to live off of that by doing clever things to make money. I mean, Madonna made they said something on Twit that I listened to this morning that she made $380 million from concerts and only a few 10 million per album or something like that. Ridiculous. So yeah, they're going to find ways to make money if they're talented musicians. Other than that, current record companies, current record business, not going to stick around. It's been going downhill since Napster, and it's really starting to drop off now big time.
The current music industry exists solely to exploit the lack of a long tail. They realized a long time ago that they make a lot more money if they sell 1 million copies of 2 albums than if they sell 1,000 copies of 10,000 albums. Because it's, economy of scale. It's easier to print 1 million
and
one
that's
CD.
why, as a musician, you were either shit in the poorhouse or shit in the rich house. Now, there's just going to be a lot of musicians who are in the normal-looking house. And that's good as far as I'm concerned. But it also means you're probably never gonna see another Elvis or another Beatles or anything. That's gonna be incredibly difficult to come by in the years to come. There isn't gonna be some huge mega hit, wide appeal musician that everyone loves and makes history. All right. I think those days might be over.
I think we should really just do 2 more and end it here.
All right, we'll do 2 more, and then we'll have to make the rest into another show.
Yep, you'll hear that show. I imagine what we'll do is the rest of this, which will probably be just as long as what we've just done. And there's good questions in the rest of it. It's not like we put them in good order or anything.
No, we just put them in order.
Yeah, pretty much
arbitrary order.
Pretty much in the order they came, with a few exceptions.
Yep.
I imagine we'll probably just make one for each day of the week, and there'll be a filler. If we're busy or something, we'll throw one of these up, because I hope you like this.
Yep.
You seemed to like them before.
All right.
All right. Well, Scott?
Oh, can you explain why we don't need to worry about the dudes messing with the Large Hadron Collider destroying our little blue planet?
The answer to that is really simple, because on a academic sense, we do need to worry, because there is a very real possibility of high-energy particle physics experiments literally destroying the fabric of space-time around us and killing us all. But there's no way we could possibly know if that happened, because we would all be destroyed instantaneously, so there's no point in worrying about it. The odds are so small, and the benefit to humanity is so great that we really don't need to worry about it, and there's nothing we can do to stop the experiments.
And the benefits from the experiments are necessary if we're going to stay around in the long term. In addition, if the experiments cause some sort of problem that wasn't instantaneous, like death for all of us, that we wouldn't even notice because we just die instantly, everybody.
Then we just learned a hell of a lot about the world.
Not only that, but we would notice that, like, if it was still being dangerous, we would notice that people near it would start dying. And we'd say, a lot of people near the Large Hadron Collider are dying. And then we'd figure that out, and we wouldn't die living so far away from it.
So it's kind of a...
Unless you live on top of it.
Experiments like this are effectively very forward-thinking. These are the kinds of experiments that will help us answer questions 10,000 years from now. These are the experiments that, while there's a tiny, tiny, tiny chance that we'll destroy ourselves now, the odds are low, and success is like one more component in the puzzle that will eventually, hopefully, allow us to tackle the questions of 100,000-year civilization.
It's sort of like when those guys set off the nuke thinking it could have set the atmosphere on fire.
Yeah, or just nuclear power in general. The Germans, we didn't know what was going to happen. That was a scary time for a lot of scientists, and science is risky and science is scary, but the alternative is to not advance. And I think we as a collective consciousness have decided time and time again that advancing is worth the risk.
If you disagree, go with the Unabomber.
All right.
Unabomber 2 times, I'm going for 3 Unabombers.
So, should we send people back to the moon, to Mars, elsewhere? I really don't want NASA messing with my secret moon base. What do you think about space exploration in general? That's a good open-ended question to end on.
I'd like to go into space. It's fun. It could be cool. We're eventually going to have to, I guess, if we run out of stuff on Earth.
I guess, I hate to say this, but I feel like right now there are much more pressing problems on Earth.
There are much more pressing problems on Earth, but in the long term, I think to say in the long
term, but I think in the short term, like, on one hand, I really, like, the push to the moon was this amazing feat, and I'm not going to say what I said before about how awe-inspiring it was, but I feel like the push to Mars, or the push to go back to the moon, while it would be a great thing, I feel like the cost and the risk are not really worth it compared to what we could spend that shit. Like, imagine if we put the effort that it would take to go to the moon again toward fixing our economy on a fundamental level, or fixing, I don't know, the healthcare issues on a fundamental level. The amount of resources that it would take to do these things, put in any other direction, could see a lot more benefit for a lot more people in the short term. And I think, as a result, give us a wider base of resources to then explore these longer-term questions later.
All right, so, we're going to stop here?
I think we should stop there.
All right, we'll stop, and then the rest of the questions will be answered another time.
I hope you enjoyed this. We're going to continue this all week. I don't think we'll do another week of this. We'll just throw in the extra episodes whenever we need to do an extra episode somewhere.
That sounds good.
So I hope you liked it. If you have any follow-up questions, ask them, and maybe someday in the next 10 or 15 years, we'll get to them. This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music.
Be sure to visit our website at www.frontrowcrew.com, where you'll find show notes, links, our awesome forum, a link to our Frapper map, and links to all the RSS feeds.
We say feeds plural because Geeknights airs 4 nights a week, covering 4 different brands of geekery. Mondays are science and technology. Tuesdays, we have video games, board games, and RPGs. Wednesdays are anime, manga, comic nights. And Thursdays are the catch-alls for various rants and tomfoolery.
You can send us feedback by email to geeknights@frontrowcrew.com. Or you can send audio feedback via Audio. Just click the link that says Send Me an Audio on the right side of our website.
If you like what you hear, you can catch the last 100 episodes in iTunes or in your favorite podcatcher. For the complete archives, visit the website, which has everything.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 2.5 license. This means you can do whatever you want with it as long as you give us credit, don't make money, and share it in kind. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.